My MIL kept reminding me at every dinner that I was an orphan. She told my husband to hope I'd know how to be a mother, since I didn't have one. At Thanksgiving, the whole family finally spoke up. I lost both my parents before I turned 12. My mom died when I was 8 from cancer, and my dad passed when I was 11 from a stroke. After that, I bounced between my grandma's house and my uncle's place, until my grandma got too sick to take care of me, and my uncle moved out of state. I ended up in foster care at 13, and stayed there until I aged out at 18. I don't tell people this for sympathy. I tell people this so they understand that when someone uses it against me, it hits different than a normal insult. I met my husband Ricky when I was 23. He was kind and funny, and the first person who didn't treat my past like a sad movie. He asked about my parents once. I told him the short version, and he said okay, and moved on. He didn't pity me. He didn't ask follow-up questions. He just accepted it, and that was the moment I knew I loved him. We got married 2 years later. That's when I met his mother, Denise. The first time I had dinner at her house, she asked me where my parents were. I told her they passed away when I was young. She tilted her head and said, "Oh, so you're an orphan." Not, "I'm sorry. Not that must have been hard." Just, "Oh, so you're an orphan," like I told her I was left-handed. Ricky told her that was a weird way to respond. She said she was just clarifying. I let it go because it was our first meeting and I didn't want to start trouble. The second dinner, she asked me who walked me down the aisle at our courthouse wedding. I told her nobody. She looked at Ricky and said, "That's so sad." She didn't even have anyone to give her away. Ricky told her to stop. She said she wasn't being mean. She was just stating facts. The third dinner, she brought up holidays. She asked me what I used to do for Christmas growing up. I told her it depended on where I was living at the time. She turned to Ricky's sister Val and said, "Can you imagine not having a real Christmas?" Val didn't respond. Denise kept going. She said it must be so strange for me to be at a real family table because I probably wasn't used to it. I put my fork down and told her I'd had plenty of real meals at real tables. She held up her hands and said she didn't mean anything by it. That became her thing. Every single gathering, every single dinner, every single holiday, Denise found a way to bring up the fact that I was an orphan. When I cooked for Ricky, she told him he should be careful because I probably never learned proper meals growing up without a mother. When I bought new curtains for our apartment, she said I had good taste for someone who grew up without a home. When I mentioned wanting to have kids someday, she looked at Val and said, "Let's hope she knows how to be a mother since she didn't really have one." That one almost broke me. Ricky went off on her for that. He told her she was being cruel. She told him she was being honest and that someone had to say it. He asked her what exactly needed to be said. She told him that she worried about me not knowing how to raise a family because I didn't come from one. Ricky didn't talk to her for 2 weeks after that, but she called and apologized. Not to me, to him. She told him she'd do better. At the next family dinner, she waited until Ricky went to the bathroom and leaned across the table and told me that I should be grateful his family accepted me because most families would have concerns about a girl with no background. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her until Ricky came back. She smiled at him and asked who wanted dessert. This went on for 3 years. 3 years of comments at every gathering. Val started noticing. Ricky's brother Gio started noticing. His dad Frank started noticing. They'd all exchange looks when Denise said something, but nobody ever fully shut it down except Ricky, and she'd just wait until he wasn't in the room. Then Thanksgiving happened. We all went to Denise's house. I brought a pie that I spent all morning making from scratch. I learned to bake from my last foster mother, who was the only adult who ever taught me anything useful in a kitchen. I was proud of that pie. I set it on the counter and Denise looked at it and said, "Oh, did you make this yourself?" I said yes. She said, "That's sweet. I guess you picked things up where you could since you didn't have a mom to teach you." She said it in front of everyone. The whole table heard it. Frank, Val, Gio, Ricky, Val's husband Rohit, everyone. But this time Gio spoke up first. He said, "Mom, why do you always do that?" Denise asked what she did. Gio said, "You always bring up her parents. Every time. It's not funny, and it never was." Val was the next one to speak. She turned in her chair and looked right at Denise, not even blinking, and said, "Mom, I've been sitting at this table for 2 years biting my tongue. Do you know how many times she has come to my house crying after one of your dinners?" My whole body went cold. I didn't know Val knew about the crying. I thought those breakdowns were private, just me in my car or on my couch with my face in a pillow trying to get it together before Ricky came home. Val turned to me and her eyes were soft, and she said Ricky told me he didn't know what to do anymore. I felt like someone had peeled back a wall I didn't know was see-through. All this time I thought I was hiding it. All this time I thought I was keeping it together and being the good wife who didn't make waves. But Ricky had been watching me fall apart after every dinner, and he had been so worried that he went to his own sister for help. I felt exposed in a way that made my skin hot. But under that feeling there was something else. Something warm, because Val knew. She had known for a while. And she was sitting at this table right now saying it out loud because she was done watching it happen too. Before Denise could respond, Ricky stood up from his chair. His voice was steady, but there was something behind it that I had only heard a few times in our whole marriage. He looked at Denise and said, "Mom, I told you after the mother comment that if you did it again, we were done coming to dinners. You told me you understood. You called me and apologized. And then you waited until I left the room and told my wife she should be grateful we took her in like she's a stray." The way he said that word, stray, it hung in the air like smoke, because that's exactly what Denise had made me feel like for 3 years. A stray someone brought in out of pity. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Then Frank cleared his throat. Frank, who barely ever said more than a few words at these dinners. Frank, who usually just ate his food and nodded along and let Denise run the table like she always did. He didn't stand up. He just sat there in his chair at the head of the table and spoke in this low, calm voice that somehow hit harder than anyone else's. He said, "Denise, I have watched you do this, and I should have said something a long time ago. What you say to her is not honesty. It's mean, and I'm ashamed I let it go on this long." I watched Denise's face when he said that. It cracked. Not like she was about to cry. More like something she had been so sure of just broke right down the middle. Frank had never done this before. Not in front of the family, not in front of me. Denise had always been the one who ran things at that table, and Frank let her because that was their deal. She talked, and he stayed quiet. But right now, Frank was looking at her like he didn't recognize her, and I could tell that hurt her more than anything Gio or Val or Ricky had said, because Frank was her foundation. He was the one person she thought would always be on her side no matter what, and he just told her in front of everyone that he was ashamed. For a second, the room felt like it might settle, like maybe that would be enough, but that's not what happened. Denise Denise pushed her chair back and stood up. Her face had gone from cracked to hard. She put both hands on the table and looked around the room and said, "So now I'm the villain because I ask questions. I'm the bad guy because I care about this family." Her voice was getting louder. She said, "You all want to pretend like her situation is normal, but it isn't." I didn't say anything that wasn't true. Then she pointed at me, right at me, and said, "You did grow up without parents. You did grow up in foster care. Those are facts. I'm sorry if facts hurt your feelings." Every single word landed on me like a rock. She was standing in her own kitchen on Thanksgiving, pointing at me and calling my dead parents a fact, like they were just a line on a piece of paper and not two people I loved more than anything in this world. And for a second, the old feeling came back. The shame, the smallness, the voice in my head that said, "Just be quiet, just let it go, don't make it worse." But then something different happened. The shame didn't stick. It came and it passed right through me like wind through a screen door. And what was left behind was anger. Not the hot kind that makes you say things you regret. This was clear, steady, but like a light turning on in a room that had been dark for a long time. Gio leaned forward and said, "Nobody is saying those things aren't true, Mom. We're saying you use them like weapons, and you know exactly what you're doing." Denise stared at him. Then she looked at Val, at Frank, at Ricky, at Rohit, who was sitting next to Val with his arms crossed. She was looking for someone who would give her some kind of sign that this was being blown out of proportion. Nobody moved. Nobody looked away. Nobody gave her a thing. She sat back down slowly, and I could see it in her eyes. That moment when she realized that not a single person at that table was on her side. Denise softened her voice and looked right at me and said, "I'm sorry if I've hurt you. I really am. I just worry about my son. That's all a mother does." For half a second, I almost believed her. The room relaxed a little. Val let out a breath. Frank nodded like maybe this was it. Maybe she finally got it. Then Denise kept going. She said, "I hope you understand that I come from a place of love. I had a mother. I had a father. I had Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and someone to teach me how to be a wife. I just want to make sure Ricky has that too." And just like that, the apology wasn't an apology anymore. It was the same insult wrapped up in softer words. She was still saying I wasn't enough. Val caught it first. She said, "Mom, did you seriously just apologize?" And then say the same thing again in a nicer voice. Denise said she didn't say anything wrong that time. Gio put his fork down hard. Rohit looked at Val and shook his head. I felt something snap inside me. Not anger, clarity. Denise was never going to stop because she didn't think she was wrong. Every apology would just be a costume over the same message. Every "I just worry" was code for "you're not good enough." And I realized that staying quiet all this time hadn't kept the peace. It had just given her permission to keep going. I stood up, not loud or dramatic. I just stood. Every eye in the room turned to me. Ricky reached for my hand. I didn't take it. Not because I was mad at him, but because I needed to do this myself. I looked at Denise and said, "I need to say something and I need you to listen to the whole thing." She sat there scanning every face at that table looking for one person who would back her up. Nobody did. I said my mom's name was Danny. She died when I was 8. She had cancer and it took her in 4 months. I sat next to her bed the last week because nobody else was there to do it. I was 8 years old holding my mother's hand while she died. So when you say I don't know what a mother is, you need to understand what you're actually saying to me. The room didn't move. Nobody picked up a fork. Nobody shifted in their seat. Denise was looking at me and for once she wasn't preparing her next line. She was just listening. I said my dad's name was Bennett. He had a stroke in the kitchen when I was 11. I called the ambulance. I rode with him. He didn't make it. My voice was steady and that surprised even me. I had told this story before but never like this. Never standing up. Never looking someone in the face while I said it. I said my grandma Ashlyn took me in but she got sick too. My uncle Claudius tried but he had to move for work. I ended up in the system. I lived in 4 different homes before I turned 18. I took a breath. My last foster mother Ananya was the only person who taught me anything in a kitchen. That pie on your counter, I made it with a recipe she taught me. So when you say I picked things up where I could, you're right. I did. Because I had no other choice. Val had tears running down her face and she wasn't wiping them. Frank had his hand over his mouth and his eyes were wet. Ricky was sitting there with his eyes locked on me and I could see everything in his face. Love and pain and pride all at the same time. Gio was staring at Denise with this look like he was waiting to see if any of this was getting through. I let the quiet sit for a second because I needed them to feel what I had been carrying. Then I kept going. I said, "You've spent 3 years reminding me that I don't have parents. Every dinner, every holiday, every time Ricky leaves the room. You told me I should be grateful your family accepted me. You said most families would have concerns about a girl with no background." I paused and looked right into Denise's eyes. "I'm not a girl with no background, Denise. I'm a woman who built herself from nothing. And I did it without a single person like you helping me." Denise opened her mouth. I held up one hand and said, "I'm not done." And she closed her mouth, just like that. The same woman who had talked over me for 3 years, who had filled every silence with another comment about my past, who had never once let me finish a sentence at her table, she closed her mouth and sat there, because the power in that room had completely changed. It wasn't hers anymore. I said I have spent 3 years staying quiet because I didn't want to ruin Ricky's relationship with his mother. I let you say terrible things to me because I thought that's what a good wife does. I thought if I just took it and smiled and kept showing up that eventually you'd see me as family, but I'm done. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't shake. I was standing in that kitchen and I meant every single word. I said, "You don't get to use my dead parents as dinner conversation anymore. Not once. Not ever again. And if you can't sit at a table with me without reminding me I'm an orphan, then I won't be sitting at your table." I looked at Ricky. He was already looking at me. His eyes were red and his jaw was tight and he gave me the smallest nod, the kind only I would notice. I looked back at Denise and said, "And neither will he." Denise tried one more play. She started crying. She said, "I can't believe my own family is ganging up on me at Thanksgiving. In my own house. I cooked for all of you." She looked at Frank like he was her last chance and said, "Are you going to let her talk to me like that?" Frank didn't move. He didn't even blink. He just said she didn't say a single thing that wasn't true, Denise. Her last lifeline just cut itself loose. Denise turned to Ricky. Her eyes were searching his face for something she could use. She said, "Are you really going to choose her over your own mother?" Ricky stood up right next to me, shoulder to shoulder, and looked at her with this calm, tired expression that told me he had been ready for this moment for a long time. He said, "Mom, she is my family. She's been my family for 5 years, and I'm not choosing her over you. You're choosing this behavior over all of us. Every time I asked you to stop, you went behind my back and did it anyway. You called to apologize to me, not to her. Not once in 3 years did you ever tell her you were sorry. That landed hard. I could see it on Denise's face because she knew it was true. She had never once looked me in the eye and said, I'm sorry for what I said to you. Every apology went through Ricky like he was a middleman, like I wasn't even worth talking to directly. Ricky said you called me after the mother comment. You cried on the phone. You said you understood why I was upset. And then the very next dinner, you waited until I went to the bathroom and told my wife she should be grateful. You said that to her face, Mom, while I was 20 feet away. Denise said I was sorry 10 minutes ago, right here at this table. What more do you people want from me? Val leaned forward and said, no, Mom, you said I'm sorry if I hurt you, and then told her again that she didn't have a real childhood. That's not an apology. That's a speech with a costume on. Denise pushed her chair back hard enough that it scraped against the floor. She stood up and put her napkin down and said, fine. If everyone wants to make me the bad guy, then maybe I just won't come to family events anymore. Maybe that would make everyone happy. She said it sharp and loud, and she was waiting for someone to say, no, Mom, don't go. For Val to grab her arm, for Frank to shake his head, for Ricky to fold like he had folded 100 times before. She stood there and she waited, and nobody moved. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds. The clock on the wall kept ticking. The oven timer had gone off a while ago, and nobody had touched it. 10 seconds, 15. The silence was so thick I could feel it on my skin. Denise's face started to change. The tears dried up. The performance dropped away like a mask falling off a hook. Her shoulders came down. Her chin lowered. She looked around that table one more time, slower this time, and what she saw must have hit her like a wall. Frank was looking at his hands. Val was looking at me. Gio was looking at the table. Ricky was standing next to me with his hand on the back of my chair. Rohit had his arms crossed. Nobody was reaching for her. Not because they didn't love her. They were all just tired. Years of watching Denise do this. Years of making excuses. Years of saying that's just how Mom is, or she means well, or she didn't mean it like that. All of that was done. She looked at me last, and what I saw in her eyes was something I had never seen from her before. It was fear. The kind that comes when you realize the thing you thought you controlled doesn't belong to you anymore. Frank stood up slowly and walked around the table to where Denise was standing. He didn't touch her. He just stood there and said quiet but clear, Denise, sit down. Nobody is leaving, but things are going to change tonight. He said, I have loved you for 34 years, but I have watched you treat this girl like she's less than us, and I kept quiet because I thought you'd figure it out on your own. You didn't. So I'm telling you now, she is our daughter-in-law. She is part of this family, and the way you've spoken to her is the worst thing I've seen you do in all our years together. Denise sat down, not because she wanted to, because Frank's words carried a weight that nobody else's could. This was her husband, and he just told her in front of their children that she had done the worst thing he had ever seen. Gio leaned forward and said, Mom, when I get married someday, I need to know you won't do this to my wife too, because if this is how you treat the people who love your kids, I'm not bringing anyone home to meet you. I mean that. Denise stared at him and said I would never. Gio shook his head slow and said you already did. Val walked over to where I was standing and put her hand on my shoulder and said, I should have said something the first time I heard it. I'm sorry you didn't deserve any of this. Rohit nodded from his chair. Val turned to Denise and said, Mom, she is the best thing that ever happened to Ricky. Everyone in this room can see it. The only person who can't is you. Ricky reached for my hand and I took it this time. He turned to Denise and said, Mom, I love you, but I need you to hear me. If you cannot treat my wife with basic respect, we will not be at your table for Christmas or Easter or any dinner. I am not bluffing. I will choose her every single time. Not because I don't love you, because she has never once asked me to choose. You have, every single time. The room went quiet. Denise was looking down at her hands in her lap. The performance was gone. The deflection was gone. She was just a woman sitting in her kitchen realizing that every person she raised had turned out better than the version of herself she had been showing them. She looked up at me. Her voice was small and cracked, and nothing like the voice she had used on me for 3 years. She said, I don't know why I do it. I looked at her for a long time. I could have walked out. I could have told her it was too late, but I didn't. I said then figure it out, because I'm not going anywhere. Denise nodded. It wasn't a big dramatic moment. There were no hugs, no tears of joy, just a nod, but it was the first honest thing she had done in 3 years. I sat back down in my chair. Ricky pulled it in for me. Frank reached across the table and squeezed my hand once and let go. Val set a plate in front of me. Gio grabbed the pie from the counter and cut into it and said, I'm trying this first. We ate. Nobody brought it up again.